Hello everyone. I'm Daniel. I work for Recon Digital. We're a company based in London. We do general tech consultancy, and we also have some in-house optimization products, so check us out if you're interested. And today, the talk is called GraphQL in the Post-Hype Era, so we're going to be talking about protobuf and gRPC implementations. No, we're going to be talking about GraphQL. And I want to cover a lot of things, and we have limited time, so I'll just go straight ahead and start with the first slide, which explains a bit the title of the talk. So what do I mean by post-hype era? So I do follow a lot of tech blogs. I read Hacker News. I'm in all of the subreddits. And I have been doing software engineering for some time now, and it is the general perception that GraphQL is not as hot as it used to be. It's not talked about as much. You don't find people being as hyped about it as they were maybe 4 years ago. So you see here in this slide that there are some very catastrophic messaging going on. So you have this very scary-looking graph trending down. You have people saying that no technology has crashed and burned more than GraphQL. So very doomsday type messaging. And first off, I want to analyze whether this is true or not. That will be the first topic of the talk. After that, I will go into more details of what we have learned with GraphQL, like what things does it do well, what things does it not do so well, and in which situations it kind of makes sense to consider GraphQL architecture for your applications. So this is more or less the same as we have seen before. So there's contradictory messages. As you see, some people say that GraphQL is finally boring, and people don't talk about it because it's now stable. It has plateaued. It's now a mature technology, and we have ridden out the hype, and it's now a pure mature technology. Others say that I'm done with it, and I don't want to work with it anymore. So which is it? So first off, I want to check the graph. I want to double-check the graph from the first slide that you saw. And it's this very scary-looking trending down graph. This marks the Stack Overflow trend, so how many questions are asked in Stack Overflow with this tag. And if you look at it this way, it does kind of look very bad, and you're wondering what has happened here. But there's a very funny relative box right there. And if you check that, which marks it kind of compounds the graphic with the total amount of questions on the website, you see that the picture here is quite different. GraphQL is actually not trending down so heavily. In fact, you could argue it's trending up. And compared to other similar technologies or other API tech in the same vicinity, I would say it's doing fairly OK. Same thing for Google Trends. I check how much people are searching for these terms, how much GraphQL is being looked for. And compared to things like WebSockets, gRPC, again, no particular cherry picking here. I've just picked technologies that are kind of within the same API world, and they are similar in that way. And as you see in the graph, it doesn't really look too bad. It looks approximately the same. You can try to get the slope from the beginning to the end, but honestly, you can see it's the same shape. Same for the NPM package downloads. So what you're seeing here is just that. It's the NPM package downloads for things like Socket.io, Next, Jest, all very common libraries. And then you have GraphQL. And you can see that it follows very much the same trend. And in fact, more people are downloading GraphQL now than they were back in 2022. So I'm not sure if this completely debunks the fact that that GraphQL has trended up or down, but I think we can definitely discard the fact that that no one uses it anymore. It's clearly still a current technology, still has a lot of users, is still being widely applied, and we still have reasons to care for it. So now that we've seen this, I want to take you back to the origins of GraphQL. So what you're seeing here is actually the original blog post for GraphQL when it was presented. In the Facebook engineering blog, they wrote a very good blog post. If you haven't read it, I recommend you do so. It's a very light read. And they explain more or less what kind of problem they had and how they developed this technology to solve it. I have highlighted here a quote, and also in the next slide, you will see that I have brought attention to the things that caught my eye. And you will notice that they had very concrete problems, and they are developing a very concrete solution for those problems. So GraphQL was maybe promoted as a REST replacement, and I don't think that's fair. These people weren't really trying to replace REST in any shape or form. They had very concrete issues that they wanted to solve in the first place. What you're seeing here is that the people at Facebook, they had very differing data shapes between their clients. What does this mean exactly? It means that the data that they were requesting from maybe their desktop clients and from their mobile clients was very different. What does this mean if you are maintaining that backend? It means that you are pulling or you're having to either load your single REST endpoint with unnecessary information, half of which will be discarded, or you're maintaining kind of one REST API or one endpoint for each one of the clients that you maintain. For a massive company like this, it's obviously going to scale pretty badly. And this is one of the problems that they wanted to solve. The other was mobile app data fetching. This is kind of strange if you think about it. GraphQL is not usually presented as a mobile-first technology necessarily. Certainly not the first thing I would think about when thinking about GraphQL. But it is the case that they were thinking about things like the payload sizes, mobile network transfer speeds, and these are very concrete problems which are tackled by GraphQL, where, as you know, you only select the fields that you need from what you're requesting. These are directly addressed by an architecture like GraphQL. These are maybe not problems that you personally will need to solve. Maybe you do. That's where your criteria will enter on whether this is a good use case for you. So I want to jump now into what things GraphQL is really good at doing and what it's not really good at doing. In the interest of time, I have to single out one of each. So for the good, I'm just speaking, well, GraphQL itself. This is not very mysterious for the bunch of you that have worked with GraphQL. If you haven't seen it before, this is the star feature. This is the selling point. This is the trick of the pony. This is it. Whereas with REST, you may have had to do 3 different requests to the server in order to get your end data. With GraphQL, as you see on the right, you can just select the fields one by one. You can just pick what you want, and even transitive, let's say, dependencies or relations which are nested within one of your, let's say, tables or collections, you can access directly. This is, in my opinion, still very much the selling point of GraphQL. It's very elegant. It's a very beautiful query language. So the query language is still the main feature of this technology. And when it does work, it works beautifully. And you save not only bandwidth, but also code implementation. It's contracting between backend and frontend. It's still a very, very elegant query language. Now, for the bad, which is going to be, drumroll, authorization. I think people who have worked with GraphQL tend to agree with this. Doing authorization for GraphQL is inherently more complex than doing authorization for REST APIs. For REST-ish URL, you just can authorize or unauthorize single endpoints. For something like GraphQL, you have to be very mindful of the fields that you're giving access to. And the very graphy nature of the query language makes it so that you can traverse different entities and access resources from different points, which means that if you don't use a smart strategy in order to authenticate your resources, you might find that you have internal backdoors in order to some of your private data, which you weren't expecting to have. This is not unsolvable, but it's certainly easier to shoot yourself in the foot if you're using GraphQL and you have these kinds of problems. The thing that they recommend in the actual GraphQL documentation, I think this is quite a funny slide, by the way. They have these these green boxes where they place themselves right next to REST and RPC, and then they put this yellow box authorization, and they kind of do like this, and they throw the ball over to your court, and they say, just do it like this. I mean, fair, but easier drawn than done, right? So, so what have we learned? So GraphQL, from what we have seen, it's not dead. It's still very current. It's still being widely used. It was never meant to be a REST replacement, as we have seen from the Facebook postings. They were never trying to replace REST altogether. They just had a very particular use case in which this very concrete technology solved their issues. Trying to reapply this to more generic architectures might land in anti-patterns. Especially, this was concretely the case in maybe the early days, where people hadn't figured out how to do certain things, potentially things like caching. So it could lead into very weird and wonky architectures and many security holes being poked. And in the end, we have to remember that it's still kind of a very new concept. We haven't fully wrapped our mind around. What you see here, I'm very bad at like my screenshot foo, so you'll have to take my word for it. But the first comment is from a Facebook engineer who worked at GraphQL. The second comment is from the Hasura founder, which is one of the biggest GraphQL tools around. And I don't know if you'll get to read it, but basically they are in direct contradiction of each other. One is saying that GraphQL is very bad if you are just mapping one-to-one to a relational model behind it. The other is saying GraphQL is fantastic if you are mapping to a one-one to a relational model. So, which one do we take? I think for many things like this, the devil is in the details, and making blanket statements about such a complicated technology is bound to be inaccurate. I think you can make arguments for both, but I wouldn't. I think a one-to-one mapping to a model behind it, it's actually one of the cases where you can be very transparent with your data sources, and people can make very good use of your clients, which is the end goal of GraphQL, can make very good use of your API. So this is the last slide. These are the conclusions. I won't have too much time to go over each one of these individually. You can ask later, or you can just decide to read and debate me later. But these are some of the things that we have kind of learned about which use cases GraphQL is good for. I want to bring your attention particularly to the last one of the good ones, which is separate backend and frontend teams. People who are skeptical about GraphQL usually claim that it's a technology that solves an organizational problem, and that seems wrong. I think there's a certain point to that, but I also think that's not entirely bad. I think if technology helps solve problem, no matter what those problems are, it's a legit use of technology. And in this case, when you have very high overhead communication between your front-end and your back-end teams, this also means, by the way, that you're maintaining your clients. GraphQL can really save you a lot of time. You don't have to do backend and frontend contracting. Lots of time gets lost in meetings, developer productivity, just morale goes down. GraphQL, you kind of don't have to worry about any of this. The contract is in the spec, and you self-serve, the client self-serve what they need. So this is a very legitimate use case for GraphQL in my view. Also, things like a rapidly evolving schema. So GraphQL does versioning really elegantly. You can add fields without having to break anything. Again, same principle. People can self-serve whatever they need. So yeah, again, won't have much time to go over this, but you can ask in the Q&A later. And this actually sets up very nicely for the next talk from Andrew, who's going to go into some of the use cases and some of the good use cases for GraphQL. So yeah, I think this was everything. Hope you enjoyed. And thank you.